Peace talks to end Sudan's 16-month civil war ended in late August without direct contact between the two key warring parties. Rather than cancelling the initiative, talks continued between stakeholders including co-hosts Saudi Arabia and Switzerland, in addition to observers from the African Union and the United Nations, among others, focused on improving humanitarian access and the protection of civilians, announcing agreements to open additional aid routes, as well as commitments from the RSF to implement a code of conduct amongst its fighters, who are accused of some of the most horrific crimes since this war began in April last year. We asked both Special Envoy Perriello and Ambassador Thomas Greenfield why the US was leading this peace initiative, given the constant refrain from the region for African solutions to African problems. Thomas Greenfield explained she didn't believe there were African solutions to African problems, but that what was required instead was African leadership for African solutions. We pressed her further, asking her to explain this position. She responded that there were times when African leadership was lacking and that due to Special Envoy Perriello's efforts, African voices had been brought back into that space. She lauded the appointment of Dr. Mohammed Ibn Chambas as chair of the AU High-Level Panel on Sudan, calling it part of efforts for the organization to engage more aggressively and proactively to find a solution. Ambassador Thomas Greenfield reiterated that the moment required African leadership to work with the rest of the world to find a solution, because Sudan represented not just an African problem, but a regional one that expands beyond the African continent. The ambassador explained that when African conflicts emerged, it was often very hard for African leaders who had special interests to engage in ways to find solutions. For his part, Special Envoy Perriello explained that where leadership had been exerted in Africa, it had been a very important contribution, explaining, for example, that Sudan's neighbors had demonstrated that kind of leadership by hosting millions of refugees, particularly in a region that itself was not economically stable. But he also indicated that multilateral institutions in general were more paralyzed and polarized in their ability to respond to crises of this nature, while pointing to the overall relationship between the Gulf and the African continent as one that had been interesting in this context and beyond. The United States has indicated that a meeting on Sudan's crisis was planned for this year's United Nations General Assembly High-Level Week, set to kick off September 23rd. Shervin Bryce, SABC News, New York.